I teased it, and here we are. The Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Ryan Thomas here, joined by a guest, Joe Kraus, Western New York sports personality. And Joe and I have been going back and forth for a little while now, trying to get Joe on the show, trying to get my schedule right and his schedule right. And here we are. We finally made it happen. Joe, I'm loving the Allen and Diggs sign in the background. How's it going, buddy?
Ryan, thanks for having me. Yeah, the Alan Dick side from 2020. That was a good year. Yeah, thanks for having me. I know we've been trying to coordinate this for about the past 2 years or so. But I've loved what you've been doing on the podcast over the years, and I'm glad that you had me on. And just before we start, I just have one quick shout out, if I may. I'd like to wish a big happy anniversary to my parents, Mark and Lori Kraus, celebrating 32 years today. So thank you, parents, for love you guys. And Ryan, thanks again for having me. It's gonna be fun.
Thank you. Thanks for the shout out. I'm sure they appreciate it, as do I. So, yeah, as you said, you appreciate how I've built this platform on my podcast these last few years, and I really appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you, and I'd like to you know compliment you in return and say that I've taken notice to the work that you've done with Western New York athletics and putting out your own personality in your own way, which has been really awesome for me to see. You continue to grow and to see the content that you've continued to put out over the years. So that's why you're here. I love to have like-minded individuals like myself kind of discuss our passion for sports as well as our passion for content creating. And I want to start off the show with that concept right off the top. So you have had experience in broadcasting, you have had experience in radio, as have I, and you got the chance to work with a guy that I'm very familiar with in my community, Norm Palmer. I wanted to talk to you about that. People that are tuning in might not know who Norm Palmer is, based on he's more of a Lockport, more my hometown personality in Western New York. But, I have people tuning in from, Florida, and prayers are with them right now during Hurricane Ian. And they might not know who he is. So kind of describe to the viewers and the listeners of today's show, your relationship with Norm and how you enjoyed working with him, and how that's kind of blossomed that you're in right now.
Yeah, so I first met Norm Palmer. It was actually when I was starting out with North Tonawanda football. I was a student manager, the student statistician, and it was sophomore year. It was a TNT football game, North Tonawanda. North Tonawanda won the game. And that year was interesting because Norm came to NT. He was doing the games for WLBL, mostly for Lockport High School, as you know. And the TNT game was the game of the week. It was the rivalry week for high school football, and he came to TNT. And our athletic director at the time, Cindy Bullis, who's going to be inducted to the Section 6 Hall of Fame in a couple months now, she said, hey, I'd like to sit you next to Norm, because I was a spotter for an announcer at the time as well. And she's like, I really would like you to sit next to Norm to really see how he prepares for a game, how he does the play-by-play, because she knew that, sports journalism was the career I wanted to pursue someday. So I met with Norm, and, I was doing the stats during the first half. We talked like in between the breaks, and he asked me, hey, would you like to come on for a halftime show and provide some of the top statistics? And that was really, my first break with WLVL at the time. My first on-air exchange with Norm as well, and it really carried over for I think through my junior year of college at Canisius. We worked a couple games each year, and what Norm has done, for the past 40 years in Niagara County sports overall. He's with Newfane now, calling their games on their Facebook page, but just what he did, just for me, just seeing how you prepare for a game, how you create your charts for the starting lineups. What Norm did is pretty much what I've done when I've had to do play-by-play for football. And really what Norm brought to Niagara County sports and Lockport with the WLVL position was really that hometown pride. He just loved being up in the press box every day. And I haven't talked to him in a while, but I'm sure it's the same energy as well. And Norm was definitely having that exchange, and I still have a copy of the CD that the station gave me, dropped it off at my house of our halftime exchange. And Norm was just a great guy. Just having that moment at the age of 15, 16 to be on a radio station in that setting was really cool.
Yeah, to have that opportunity at that young of an age, I met him kind of 17, 18, coming out of high school, and he's one of those guys that's always willing to give you his time whenever you have any questions on anything involved in radio or sports broadcasting. As I built up my resume the last few years in terms of on the air, you mentioned that you started out at WLVL. What was your experience like at the radio station in Lockport? How did that kind of get you started and on your feet?
Yeah, so for WLBL, I never had a chance to be at the station per se. It was mostly just um, there was a schedule that went out. Norm would send the beginning and say, "Hey, here's the games we're doing. Let me know which ones you would like to work with. With Norm and his wife Becky." And it was mostly just a couple times. Like there was a big Niagara Falls Lockport game. I want to say Nick Cashel was the Lockport quarterback, and it went back and forth. So that was a pretty special game. And seeing, I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but there was a Lockport wide receiver. I want to say it was, but during the 2018 season, he broke the program record. His name's slipping right now, but having those types of moments with Norm and really just learning about, calling a game on the radio. I mean, it's a lot different than calling a game on TV. You have to really be as descriptive as possible because nobody's watching what's going on. You are the storyteller, per se. So really, it's having those moments, those couple games that I mentioned. There's a big one at Star Point, as well, over the years, and Newfane, especially going up to Newfane or Wilson as well. Just having those special moments. So it wasn't really like in the studio per se to answer your question, Ryan, but being able to have that opportunity of being able to say, I'm working with Norm Palmer for WLVL, one of the longest stations in the area. It was really great.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, and I've done some in studio stuff, and I'm obviously a sponge to anything as far as this stuff goes. This is my bread and butter. This is what I really enjoy, as do you. Whether it is content creating like this or just content creating in general on the air. There's so many different forms of media within broadcasting that, as you touched on it, being a storyteller on the radio and trying to create a visual for the listener that's maybe driving home from their 9 to 8 or 9 to just in their car listening to the game. Who are some of your influences that you have somewhat, I would say, found inspiration in and taken inspiration from those influences? Who are those names that come to mind for you?
Well, I think obviously I just spoke about Norm being able to
Yeah.
be around him for a while. Every kid, boy or girl that has wanted to jump into Buffalo sports would say Rick Jeanneret or John Murphy, for the Sabres and Bills. Michael Kay for the Yankees. And I know you're a big Red Sox guy, so I hope that doesn't dent in too much for you.
No,
But
not at
yeah,
all. Not at all.
yeah, just watching Michael Kay provide his games, and even like the national games, Al Michaels, the late Vin Scully, really just anybody and everybody that's been in the business, really, not even just play by play, but even at the sports desk. I still remember watching, Ed Benini at Channel 2, Jeff Russo at Channel 7, having Jeff Russo visit my school when I had a morning sports show, the sports corner at NT, all those years. Like, that was a big kick for me, having Jeff, the guy that I really watch pretty much every single day. And his timing and his pace, I really learned from a lot. And even guys that were on the tail end of their careers, but have stayed in the area. Ed Kilgore, especially the first one that comes to mind. I was fortunate enough to that he accepted, my invitation late in my senior year to come on the Sports Corner and talk about his career. And it was like nearly a half-hour show, and we were taping this every single day, Ryan, at like 7:30 in the morning. And for somebody like Ed and even Jeff and Heather Pruzak and all these people to willingly volunteer their time to come in, it was great. I guess to answer your question, there were just a host of people, whether it was on the air or even in sports writing, Jerry Sullivan, Bucky Gleason, all those guys. It's a long list, but there were a lot of guys that I noticed what they did. And really, it was more so than in the classroom, just watching how others did it and seeing how they broke down the story, and then twisting it your own way, doing it your own style. But there's a long list, starting from Norm and then all the way to the other men and women I just mentioned. There's a long list.
Yeah, and you find yourself like along the way of all those names you mentioned. Those are names that are, within the Buffalo sports landscape, but there's names sprinkled in there like Vin Scully that are different sports, and a guy like Al Michaels, as you mentioned, why he is such a big influence, I think, on all of us that are addicted to this process, addicted to the game of content creating, broadcasting, you name it, is because Al Michaels proved that he could do it in a multitude of ways. He could commentate a hockey game, the Miracle on Ice 1980 Olympic game, gold medal, or USA versus Russia and gold medal game against Finland, and then you go from that to having this Hall of Fame football broadcasting career, which now he's on Thursday Night Football with Kirk Herbstreit for the NFL. So it's an amazing longevity trick that all of those names that you've mentioned have been able to achieve. Vin Scully, Al Michaels. For me, I'm just going to say this one. This one for me is the biggest and best of all time. The best duo. When I think of the best broadcasting duo to ever exist, it is Pat Summerall and John Madden. Those two are the cream of the crop to me, and when I think of football, those are usually the first two names that actually come to mind. That experience that they gave me, that's the first experience that I really had in terms of watching football, on Sundays, or Sunday NFL on Fox, or Sundays NFL on CBS. They worked for all three networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS, all three major networks. So that just goes to show you, how great that duo actually was. And I mean, Joe, can you think of a name that is as synonymous with football as John Madden? It just, I can't think of another one that is as synonymous with football as John Madden, right?
John Madden, or maybe perhaps somebody like Howard Cosell or Danny
Right.
Don way back in the day. But you were just mentioning about Pat Summerall and John Madden and Al Michaels, all those guys, and the big thing, especially for like the play-by-play guys, it's all about versatility, right? I mean, Al jumping from hockey, going to football. He did some, I believe, baseball back in the late '80s for ABC in the World Series. Like, having that versatility is just so important. And I think that's what really, I've tried to model of just trying to learn as much as I could. And yeah, I mean, John Madden, I mean, of course, like, we wouldn't be here if there wasn't a Madden video game, right?
Right.
But I think that's why, Madden is so just united in that way too.
Yeah, and to say that like guys like us owe a lot to someone like John Madden, people would think, well, not due to the success that we have had, because our success is not even on the same wavelength as John Madden, pun intended, but in terms of the inspiration to allow our minds to say, hey, I think I can do that. I think I can try that. I want to try that. John Madden was like the first guy to make people say, I want to be a football broadcaster. I think that's what I gathered, at least from my experience growing up. But yeah, I thought that was a really cool topic to start the show off with, and I'm sure there's many more. I mean, for me, somebody like even Joe Rogan, who is the UFC color commentator and has been as long as I can remember. He helped me learn the sport when I didn't really know what it was. There's a lot of them, so shout out to all of those men and women that have been truly inspirational in terms of the journey of the evolution, I should say, in broadcasting as well. So unfortunately, we have to discuss the next topic of discussion, which is the Bills and Dolphins cap. Which I'm not excited for this one. I had to do it though. I had to put it on because I want your take on the Bills and Dolphins game. I'm sure you watched it. I'm sure you were able to take it in, and I'm sure you have maybe different thoughts than what you had, you know, Sunday at 4 o'clock. I know I do. I know Sunday at 4 o'clock I was very frustrated, very, dare I say, angry. And now sitting here at 8 o'clock, on a Wednesday night, while we're pre-recording this episode, I'm saying to myself, maybe we could learn something from this one. What's your take on the 21-19 Buffalo Bills Week 3 loss against the Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, I mean, the Buffalo Bills, coming into the game against Miami, as we all know, um, there were a lot of high expectations of how the season was going to go. And it's unfortunate, but when you have so many injuries that happen, a couple of days leading up to the game, and that finding out that guys like Poyer and Hyde are both going to be out. Hyde is out for the season now with a herniated disc, um, and just the injuries piling up throughout the game. I think one thing that we learned from is that it's still, yes, it's nice to have your starting 11, but having those guys down the depth chart is really helpful. And I think the defense, considering how the game was played near the end, and we can talk about the offense in just a second. But when you have a guy like Jaquan Johnson who's trying to, get his status in a contract year, I thought the defense did pretty well. You said 21-19 to score. I think the defense held its own with what they had. Obviously, Von Miller the week before had a couple of nice pressure plays. He didn't get that against Miami. But outside of really a couple plays that Tua had to, I believe, Waddle at the very end, the defense with who they had that day, caps off to them for keeping, the Bills in it when the offense was at times really struggling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Playing the game back in my head, it seemed as if, to your point, Tua made the throws that he needed to. He didn't make all of them. He just made the throws that he needed to. Whereas Josh Allen made 42 of 63 throws. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those games. And what I mean by that is you could look at the statistics as you have, and see that the Bills, by a wide margin, were blowing Miami out of the water in terms of passing yards, in terms of time of possession, in terms of total plays. 90 plays to Miami's 30. So that just goes to show you that offense was out there what seemed like the whole game. There was a 20-play drive that resulted in a field goal. And for Miami's defense, on the flip side to what you were saying about Buffalo's defense, talk about a well-executed game plan by the Miami Dolphins. I hate to give the Dolphins credit, but we're football guys here at our core. You have to recognize whenever an opponent that you're facing, tip your cap is the saying, tip your cap to what they were able to accomplish and really stifling Josh Allen and forcing him to throw quicker than even he is accustomed to some of these receivers, pushing their routes and whatnot. And he still had a phenomenal day. There were clutch moments in the game, little moments within the game where it seemed like Allen was forcing things a little bit. What do you think on that in terms of the Isaiah McKenzie throw that went right to the dirt? There were some moments where Miami could have picked a few of those passes off, a few of the 63 that he did throw off in that game. So what was your assessment of just Buffalo's missed opportunities overall?
Well, I mean, obviously the last touchdown opportunity, I think, was inside the 5. The pass was just a little bit short for Allen on that play. I think really just the offensive line, it wasn't fully healthy on Sunday. If we can all keep that in mind, I think Greg Van Roden, the center, and even when he went out, the third string center, how many snaps do you really think those two had with Josh Allen once, a guy like Mitch Morse went down? You know what I mean? So I think the offensive line was kind of a concern. Dawson Knox was a little shaken up down the stretch, and even a running game like if Devin Singletary and I mentioned this, to my buddies last year. If Devin Singletary is your number one running back, like try to get him the ball a little bit more because Josh Allen is over time, maybe not this season, but a couple of years from now, I'm not sure he's going to be the same explosive runner that he's been. But I would say it was a 2-point loss, and again, give credit to Miami as well for the defensive game plan and what they're building in Miami. Dolphins fans should be very pleased with the direction they are going in. And then for the Bills, you live to fight another day, and I know it's kind of a cliche to say, but as the team, this next month or so is going to be critical, Ryan, because of who is healthy. And I think it's going to start this Sunday in Baltimore. But there are some things I think they'll be able to learn from, just some little things. But again, only a 2-point loss. It was a valiant effort from both sides.
I couldn't agree more. And there was a very poignant moment at the tail end of the game to where we saw Tua basically consoling Josh Allen. And when I first saw that, I was just in I was in the moment. I was in such a miserable mood due to what took place in that game. It was ours to win and ran out of time. It makes me wonder, if Tyler Bass had the opportunity to kick it. Tyler Bass rarely misses one field goal in a game. I doubt that he would have missed a second one. That thought was replaying in my mind in that moment. And I see Tua, consoling Josh Allen, and I was a little frustrated by it in that sense in that moment based on what happened in the game. But then I sat back and I went back and I looked at it and I thought, you know what? That was pretty honorable for Tua and Allen to share that moment as competitors, because at the end of the day, we see it from the outside looking in. They know what goes on inside those white lines far more than what we do. As much as we love to analyze the game and pick it apart, and we can easily do that, these guys are mutual friends off the field. They're professionals off the field and on the field. And I really enjoyed that, actually. I thought that was a really cool moment in what is expected to be, I think, the rebirth and resurgence of this rivalry, which was so dead for so long. These teams were unbearable to watch for the better part of, almost 2 decades. So it was a fun game. It was a fun time, taking it all in. And I think there's plenty to learn from, even from the Dolphins standpoint off of a win. There's always something to learn from, whether you win or whether you lose. And especially if you lose, you don't lose, you learn. So, I think, you touched on it. This month of October here coming up is very pivotal due to the amount of guys that they have, basically banged up or out for the season in Micah Hyde's case. How do you think that these injuries and more recently the signing of Xavier Rhodes, who the Bills just signed as a free agent, coming from Indianapolis, he played in Minnesota as well with Stephon Diggs and Leslie Frazier for a year. How do you think that these injuries and the new additions, the people out and people coming in, how do you think that that'll impact their chances against the Baltimore Ravens this Sunday?
Well, I think, first for the Xavier Rhodes signing, I like the signing. I don't know if it'll be as big of an impact as we're hoping Sunday. I think it's going to take, yes, he has the familiarity with Leslie Frazier, but I think it's going to take just a little bit of time for him to figure out the playbook. And then just to answer your other question with some of the other pieces that are out, I think the big one, obviously, Micah Hyde in the secondary, he and Poyer were, that Batman and Robin duo for many seasons for Buffalo. And like I said, it's going to take guys like Jaquan Johnson to step up to try to fill those shoes. And then on the offensive side, with those question marks up on the offensive line right now, I think that if you're let me say this, if you're the Baltimore Ravens, I think the game plan, if it's not in place, and I'm certain it is because we know John Harbaugh has done this for so many years, the game plan of pressuring the quarterback might be even more of a big impact for Baltimore, considering that Buffalo doesn't have all of its pieces to protect Josh Allen. And then in the receiving game, with Isaiah McKenzie and Stephon Diggs, I think Dawson Knox, I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't been as big of an impact yet this season, considering that he had so many plays. But I think with just all the injuries as a whole, like I mentioned, it's just going to be a matter of who is healthy and just trying to stay healthy and competitive. Because it is going to be a very tight month for the Bills coming up.
Yeah, and looking ahead not only at Baltimore, but you got the Ravens, you got the Steelers, you got the Chiefs, you got some teams that are,
Yeah,
AFC contenders. And the way Lamar Jackson has played through the first 3 weeks of the season, he's one of the top passers in the NFL. He's the fifth highest rusher in the NFL. Going back to that 2018 draft class, I watched a video of Skip and Shannon Undisputed that popped up on my YouTube recommended. And Shannon Sharp was talking, they were talking about the top five quarterbacks in the draft, and it was rated Darnold, Allen, Mayfield, Rosen, and there was another one, and it wasn't Lamar Jackson. It's not coming to me right now, but it wasn't Lamar Jackson. And was talking about, what about Lamar Jackson? And they were looking like, well, we don't know if he's a quarterback. We don't know if he's this. We don't know if he's that. He might be a wide receiver, might be a running back. Lamar Jackson is an MVP, former MVP. He's had, some really good years in this league. I'm shocked, Joe, that this game between Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills and Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, I'm shocked this one is not on prime time. What do you say to that?
well, I think it's. I mean, the thing that I really like about being in the 1 p.m. slot is that Ian Eagle, that was the name I did not mention earlier, another influence, he's calling the game. But looking on the field itself, yeah, I mean, the Bills and the Ravens, I think potentially the reason why it's not in prime time, Ryan, is because of how the Bills played Sunday against Miami. Some experts, I don't necessarily believe this, but some have said that the Bills kind of underperformed against Miami. And that's probably the reason why it wasn't moved to the, or that it's still played at 1 o'clock on Sunday. And you mentioned about Lamar Jackson, that 2018 draft class. If you shuffle it up again, I would bet if Allen's not going number one, there's a solid chance it would be Lamar Jackson going number one to Cleveland instead of Baker Mayfield. But I would say that on paper it's still a really solid matchup. And just unfortunately, it's just how it's kind of lined up of who gets to play in prime time.
Yeah, I thought that was funny, just in terms of I'm thinking of this game and how potent these two quarterbacks are. Probably two of the best quarterbacks in the league outside of Pat Mahomes. And this one's played at 1 o'clock. Hey, I always say it on the show, football's meant to be watched 1 o'clock on Sundays. I'm not against it, but in hindsight, I think the NFL, once this game is played, I think this game is going to be even more entertaining than what we just saw between the Bills and Miami, especially with the motivation very high for both teams. Baltimore is looking to make a stand, make a true impact in terms of what's happened these last couple years to them. And Buffalo, obviously, the expectations are super high. So I expect a big game. What do you expect the score to be for the Bills versus Ravens this Sunday?
You mentioned Tyler Bass a moment ago in that Miami game. What would have happened down the stretch? I think it might come down to potentially the kicking game and special teams. And I know that both teams have offensive firepower, but I'm going to say Bills 23, Ravens 20. It might come down to the wire because John Harbaugh and Sean McDermott are both defensive-minded coaches. And then even with the offensive coordinators as well, Ken Dorsey for Buffalo this season, I think it's still going to come down to who makes the right plays at the right time. And I think if Tyler Bass has that moment, he's going to try to make that kick. So I'll say 23-20. What about you?
I like that prediction because I do think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to actually put both teams in the 30s. I'm going to say 34-31. I think it's going to be very tough for either Baltimore's defense or Buffalo's defense to keep these quarterbacks at bay. I think these are two of the most talented quarterbacks that the league has to offer, especially who do you put in from a practice standpoint to emulate Josh Allen if you're Buffalo, or if you're Baltimore, pardon me. And put in from a practice standpoint to emulate, Lamar Jackson. And I read today that the Bills are putting in Tavon Austin as the Lamar Jackson, emulator, if you will. And I don't know if that's I mean, that's as close as you could probably get in terms of speed, but I don't know if it is in terms of the arm. So we'll see how that pans out. But you can only do what you can do, and that's one of the few options they have. But I'm really excited for this one. I feel like this is the perfect opponent for Buffalo to come back against, and to get them motivated and to get back into gear from that loss, which was a really tough one. And on the flip side with Baltimore, the Bills have been lauded as the Super Bowl favorite. How do you see, the pecking order of the AFC? I know that the AFC over this course of this offseason has gotten a lot better. What do you think about the AFC in terms of the pecking order? Like the top three teams, who are your top three in the AFC?
Well, I think because Kansas City still has Patrick Mahomes, I think that the Chiefs are still up there, even with Tyreek Hill gone. Outside of that Colts loss this past Sunday, I think the Chiefs still have enough firepower. I think their dynasty is slowly winding down, not as quickly as some are hoping, but I think the Chiefs are still up there. Buffalo is definitely in the mix, but again, when they are healthy, especially, I think the Bills, like, it may not be not that they were going to go, undefeated in the regular season. I think that's just too big of a, with too many, if your head is too up in the clouds. I don't think it was going to be an undefeated Bills season. I think they're still going to win the division. But I would say for overall, I would say the Chiefs, the Bills, and then maybe some other team out west or in the north. It's still kind of a toss up really for my third one. There really hasn't been a third really impressive one yet. I thought the Bengals were going to be that team, but they've sort of struggled out of the gate. But I would say the Chiefs won, and the Bills in the mix as well. And there probably is a third one there. I'm just not thinking of it at the moment. But I would say that it's a very tight race. But I think it's still going to be the Chiefs Bills, the top two to kind of beat.
I like that take because as of right now, I don't think there is one that could put you at three, and that's why I said three, because I think the two best teams in the National Football League, league-wide, are the Chiefs and the Bills, regardless of conference. Just the two best teams. They have the two best quarterbacks that'll be battling it out for many, many years to come, I think. Whether the Bills fans want that to happen is another story, and maybe the Chiefs fans don't want that to happen, but I think it definitely will. But if you were to ask me who the top three power ranked, in terms of power rankings for the AFC, I should say, I would say that if it wasn't for this Justin Herbert mysterious rib injury, I don't even know what it is. I don't even think they know what it is, and they don't really know how to remedy the injury, and that whole situation seems like it's not headed in any sort of rightful direction because
Right.
of that. It seems like neither side really knows what to do. It's just, hey, he wants to play and he's playing hurt, so it is what it is. But the Chargers are a team that does scare me. If Justin Herbert is healthy, I think he could be in that core group of elite quarterbacks, the Mahomes, Allen, Joe Burrow definitely put himself in that discussion as well. And a team that I thought would be much better thus far than what they have been were the Las Vegas Raiders, and here they are sitting at 0-3. So you never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, I would say the Vegas Raiders was really my biggest disappointment so far. I've always really liked Derek Carr at quarterback. I don't know if it's just his style or just his personality, what he said, in the locker room or in the post-game press conferences. I've always really liked Derek Carr as like a true leader. But I think with Josh McDaniels coming in, trying to implement some of his own stuff, some of the playbook he had with New England, and even it looked like at times watching the old Denver Broncos teams he had. I've kind of been surprised with how the Raiders go, and even owner Mark Davis, and it was a closed door conversation with Josh McDaniels. But 3 games in, I don't know if that's the right direction that the Raiders would be expecting from a guy that once coached Tom Brady and Tim Tebow and so many other quarterbacks. But yeah, the biggest disappointment for me, Ryan, would probably be the Vegas Raiders because of how much talent they had. And they were a couple plays away last postseason from just moving on. And the interim coach coming in after John Gruden left, it was kicked out. And that momentum, I thought it would have carried over. Obviously, there's still a lot of football left to play, but I'm surprised with how the Raiders have started out here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The Raiders have been extremely disappointing, but that's kind of their MO over the last, 22 years. I hate to say that, but it is what it is for Raider Nation. To move on from the Buffalo Bills, we are Buffalo sports guys. I want to get just your Buffalo Sabres season expectations. I know you're a big football guy as well as a big hockey guy, much like myself. I got the enforcer line behind me up in the top left, the Ray, May, and Barnaby. Those are the guys that helped me, love the Sabres as well as the French Connect on the screen, but a big Sabres guy as well, folks. So I want to get Joe's season expectation for the Buffalo Sabres 2022-2023 squad. What do you think's going to happen, Joe?
Well, I think, a couple weeks ago they had the Fan Fest downtown, and I went for a couple hours, and you could tell that it was a very small outing, but there's a spark coming back around the arena, Ryan, that I haven't seen with the Sabres since at least middle school, right? Those early 2010 teams when Lindy Ruff was winding down his tenure. It's slowly coming back, and I think for this season, kind of like what Kevin Adams said in his press conference a couple of days ago, that when he said, "I don't really want to put a specific point number on how this team is going to go," and I think that's the right decision, the right mindset that we as Sabres fans should have. If they make the playoffs, great. I don't know if they're going to make it this season. I think they're on the cusp of getting there, and it really starts with who's behind the bench in Don Granato. My graduate program at Damon University the past couple of years, we talked a lot about leadership, and it seemed like a lot over the last few months of that program, Ryan. I mentioned Don Granato's name at least 10 times a class because of what he has brought to the Sabres organization. He had, I think 13 to 15 games after Ralph Krueger was shown the door, and it really could have gone either way. And it just seemed that when he was brought into that head coach role that late in that season a couple years ago and had 13 to 15 games, we'll call it, to really try to mold something together, like that was exciting. I don't remember which team they were playing the first couple games in, but it was like, I think it was against the Penguins. It's like, oh, wow, like they're only trailing by one against the Penguins. They won against the Penguins. Like just emotions like that. And having a guy like Don Granato, who like I said, I viewed him as a really strong leader. I think he would fit in nicely if he came to one of our classes to talk about leadership, and really just being that mentor. I think a lot of these guys needed. Like for example, Rasmus Dahlin, when Ralph Krueger was coaching the team, Dahlin seemed a shell of himself that we saw coming out of the draft, right? And then when Don Granato came in, it was like a totally different person, just breathing in that sense of confidence. Even one of the scouts said having Don Granato has been, and I'm paraphrasing, a complete 180 compared to what the scout had experienced 10 years before. And even having guys like re-signing Tage Thompson, who bought Jack Eichel's house the other day, having him come back and locked in for the next 8 years is going to be huge. Jeff Skinner, another guy who has had, a bounce back in his career with Granato at the helm. There's a lot of big storylines for the Sabres, even in goal, like whether it's going to be Craig Anderson or Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. I think that would be a nice 1-2 punch there. I just think, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure if it's going to be a playoff season. And I know some people will get angry at me for saying that. But I do believe that the Sabres are in the right direction. Like if you grew up watching those, the mid 2000s or early 2010 teams when there was a lot of excitement on the ice, I think it's there. And if you haven't started watching Sabres teams, I think you'll really enjoy what Granato has brought. He knows what Buffalo hockey is all about. Let me end it with that. He knows what the fans really, why they love the Sabres, why they stuck with them through all this pain. And I think he's put that message in the locker room too. I think it's going to be a good season in the right direction.
I completely agree with everything you just said. There's nothing that you just said that I can't disagree with. I talk with my dad often about the Bills and the Sabres, and towards the tail end of the season for the Sabres this past season, April, around then, May, around then, we had a discussion where I told him that Doug Granato is the key to what is taking place. I know Kevin Adams has I think he's done a phenomenal job, and I was really happy to see him, get an extension and stay here. And I think he is a true Buffalo guy, and he really genuinely wants the Sabres to become relevant as a bona fide, franchise in the NHL. And they've lost that relevancy for a lot of reasons, and none of which have anything to do with Kevin Adams. So I remind people of that because, yeah, they've been on some hard times these last few years, but this regime, Kevin Adams and Don Granato, really have nothing to do with that. They only have anything to do with what's taken place beyond their hiring date, and that's the only thing I'm going to judge is what has taken place beyond their hiring date for Kevin Adams and Don Granato, and I like what I've seen. I like the atmosphere. I like the mood that surrounds the team in terms of you could go to the Sabres website and see like their locker room, discussions after a win, or into each player that is on the roster. And I think, Joe, what sets them apart this time around is that you have a former player as a GM, as well as a coach that coached at every level, junior hockey, collegiate hockey, and is well known for having great success with developing young talent. And the Sabres have a ton of young talent. I think they have the best pipeline in the league right now, and I think you'd agree with that too. I'm right on the same page with you. I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but I do see them working towards something and building something, which I couldn't say the same thing, for the last 5 to 10 years. We were wondering what was the direction? What are they exactly doing? Are they all in, or are they tanking? What are they doing? Especially with some of the coaching hires they've had these last few years. But Don Granato, I think, is the man for the job, especially for right now. And I love Kevin Adams, so I love everything you said. Joe, I really appreciate you hopping on the show today. Thank you for hopping on. This was an awesome episode.
Ryan, thanks again for having me. I'm loving what you're doing with the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It was nice to join and discuss some sports with a fellow Niagara County native like yourself. Keep up the good work that you're doing, buddy, and hopefully we'll get to do this again soon.
Oh, of course, yeah, and I look forward to seeing the work that you're putting out there, and you're doing a great job. So keep up the great work, and I'll be in touch soon, of course.
Sounds great, man. Thank you so much.
Still with me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I said I didn't hear that last part. What was that?
It sounds great. Thanks again for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining me. Despite that tail end technical difficulty that I just had, the show went smoothly up until the end, as always. But I really appreciate you hopping on, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon, Joe.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Take care. So that was Joe Kraus, a part of a lot of awesome sports groups. One in particular, Western New York Athletics, one that I have grown to really enjoy their content. So I greatly appreciate Joe hopping on the show. We talked all things Buffalo sports, Bills, Sabres. I got 10 seconds. I'm out. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast.